Welcome to Origin Story, where we discuss the lives and careers of underrepresented groups in professional fields. Disclaimer, this chat represents our views and not those of our employers or any affiliated organizations. Today, I'm excited to have Lori Cheek here with me, a serial entrepreneur who's seen the ups and downs of the marketplace and technology scene from Louisville, Kentucky to the big city of New York. So hope you're ready for a cheeky conversation. And so with that, I'm going to pass over to Lori. Lori, I'd love to hear a little bit about, how you grew up and, obviously you grew up in Kentucky, small town America. How does an entrepreneur now like yourself find themselves in the big city?
The big city as in New York City,
Yeah.
right? Well, I felt like I grew up in the tiniest town ever invented in the entire world. And I just remember from the age of 2, I was crawling out of my skin to discover something bigger. So although it took me 21 years to get there, I knew there was something magical out there. My parents didn't really want me to leave the United States, and I figured out New York was the magical place to go. But it was a long journey to get there. And I remember graduating architecture school at the University of Kentucky, and I threw up my graduation hat, drove home, packed up a Penske truck, and drove to New York City that day. And I didn't look back.
Love it. And we'll definitely get a little bit more into, that part of the story as well. And it was interesting in our discovery session how we talked a little bit about, what it kind of feels like to be in small town America. And there's obvious differences there with the kind of coastal environment, as opposed to places that are a little bit more rural. And, especially a place as daunting as New York. I think that's a classic story in itself, but everybody's experiences are different. So what was yours like maybe growing up and, during the time you were going to school? What kind of challenges did you face? And how did that kind of contribute to get to where you are today?
Well, it was interesting. I think the population of my hometown was maybe 1,700 people. I had like 76 people in my graduating class. But my parents sort of dropped me into so many different things that were offered even in my tiny town. So I was taking ballet and gymnastics and tennis and just everything they could throw me in. I was in 4-H making my own clothes. And I feel like a lot of this ultimately led to me and my ambition to be an entrepreneur. But it was a tiny one stoplight town. Everybody knew everybody. Like you're driving down the street and everybody raises their finger because you know that person that's passing you. There's no doubt. So there was a definite sense of community, but I just was dying to find something bigger and more exciting. I just found myself super bored all the time. And I've definitely grown a different sort of appreciation after having been gone for so many years. But it was an interesting childhood for sure.
Of course. And you mentioned that your parents were in education. I had mentioned that my mother was as well. She worked for, everything from Easter Seals to Head Start to early childhood education to even being a nanny. And there's, I think, some interesting things that come of that. And, having an educator as a parent and somebody, that contributes to your upbringing in that way. What was that kind of like? And, how do you feel like your relationship with your parents also contributed to where you are today?
I mean, I know I was a problematic teen, and I guess most teenagers are, but I think I really gave my parents a run for their money. But yeah, my mom was my high school counselor. My dad was a middle school counselor at the neighboring town. It's like I could not misbehave. And if I did, they'd disown me because I was sort of this model student as their child. But yeah, I think having people in education as parents was really sort of a gift in the end, because they were educators. And even in that tiny town, they taught me so many amazing lessons that I'm very grateful for. So, yeah, I think they crafted my life in a pretty amazing way ultimately.
Love it. Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of impacts that come out of that. And it is interesting in that as you go through the school system, that there's definitely a defined structure towards it, and there's different parts of the educational system that are structured in different ways, but it generally fits kind of the same format. And maybe having that kind of upbringing can boost you, but also maybe contribute to curiosity. It sounds like you're involved in quite a lot of activities growing up, and that gave you a broad range of options as well. And I think you even kind of were talking about um, within that area and within the town you grew up in, um, that there's some special things about growing up in a small town as well that might differentiate it from being in a major metropolitan area, and that the community is a little bit different that way too. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I always sort of get a little emotional when I think about this story, but when I was 13 years old, our house caught on fire in the middle of the night. It was one of the coldest nights in the history of Kentucky. My dad woke up to silence in the house when we used to have these fans buzzing, and he started screaming, "The house is on fire, get out, get out." So we grabbed what we could, went running out into the snow. We lived in a town with a volunteer fire department, so it wasn't even like a real fire. There was were like kids in my school that were
Right.
going to get in the fire truck and drive up to try to hose down our house. But when the first fire truck arrived, the water was frozen in the truck. It was that cold, so then they had to call up the other ones. No cell phones then, so the other one came up and slid on the ice and crashed into the first fire truck. I don't know. It was just like a
Oh no.
fiasco before they could even get water on the house. End of story is we lost absolutely everything. But I remember at the end of it, when we were down at the bottom of the hill in the car, it was me and my mom and my dad and my brother. My dog was in the basement, so he didn't get out, which was very sad. But looking up at that house, I remember thinking these material possessions don't even matter, because what mattered was in that car right then. But the beautiful thing about the small town community was within the next few days, everyone in that town had loaded up this apartment where we were sort of staying until we could get our feet back on the ground somewhere, with everything we possibly could have needed to start a new life. And that was this tiny town that I had been hating as I was growing up, that really pulled together. And this is something that wouldn't happen in a city like New York. You don't even know that many people. So it was just this beautiful sort of outreach that I gained an entirely new appreciation for where I grew up.
Yeah, and it definitely seems like there's a similar but different sense of community in New York, and it varies where you are in the world as well. Um, but there is this thing that being from Wisconsin, being from Milwaukee, and having grown up in some of the towns surrounding that is quite different, and it's very closely knit, and um, you know the community really has to band together, by nature of their situation, especially you can't maybe depend as much on um, you know uh, a lot of people, so you have to do what you have with a small amount of people that are there, and there is a very special sense of community that seems to come out of that. Um, and so I guess moving on from that, you talked a little bit about your university experience as well. I guess that ties into the education thing a little bit. You were involved in a ton of things in school. How did you settle on what you ended up pursuing in university? And like what continued to drive your interest there?
Well, I still wanted to get out of Kentucky. Even
Yeah.
when I graduated high school, I was just dying to go. But still, I advanced into one of the bigger cities in Kentucky. My parents wanted me to stay in state for tuition reasons. And I realized that the University of Kentucky had one of the top 5 architecture programs in the nation at that time. And I was very creative and wanted to do something that would actually make money instead of being an artist that was more scientific. So I applied for architecture school, and I think I got a pretty darn good education there. So, and now I own a dating app website. So I don't know what that means.
Right. Love it. Yeah, and obviously there's some transitions that you made in your professional life. Once you got out as well. I was especially, touched by the whole Penske truck to New York story. I got to New York on a Greyhound, never doing that again. That was about a day and a half trip. Um, and there's interesting stops along the way. Um, so yeah, and then you made your transition to New York, and you obviously did a lot to get where you were there as well. You talked a little bit about when you first arrived in New York. So somebody coming from outside in again a classic New York story, but everybody's story is different. Um, what was that like? And do you feel like there was some difficulties there, coming in as a quote unquote transplant and getting used to the rhythm of things and, kind of how you came up there?
Well, it's interesting when I packed up that Penske truck and then moved all of that stuff from my Kentucky apartment into my New York City apartment, which was like an eighth of the space. I had to throw most of that stuff out on the street because it wouldn't fit in the apartment. Little did I know that the life of New York City would never be the same as I was living with, a window or a big, just everything, the space. And I remember even parking my Penske truck out on the street where all these no standing signs were, which I
Mhm.
literally thought that meant sort of no loitering. I woke up the next day and had 3 parking tickets, like
Oh, wow.
$250 a pop on my Penske truck that I had to go battle with a judge. But I was saying, I'm new in town. We don't have these signs in Kentucky. I just thought that it was in front of a nursing home. Anyway, that's why I thought you couldn't stand there. They just wanted you to go away.
Right.
But other than that, just arriving in New York City was probably the most exciting thing I've ever done in my life. I remember crossing the Triborough Bridge and seeing this magic. And yeah, I really never looked back. There was no turning back for me. And the irony is now I'm back in Kentucky, but I just, for weeks, kept thinking, how am I ever going to figure out my way around this massive place? But the crazy thing is, 25 years later, it almost feels like that town where everybody's raising their finger
Right.
when you're driving, because I couldn't leave the house in New York without seeing somebody I knew. But I think the beauty of that is that it's such a pedestrian place where you can physically run into people on foot while everybody else is on cars everywhere else. But yeah, it was a major transition, but something I was very excited for.
Sure. Yeah, and I can echo that. There does seem to be, especially native New Yorkers, they seem to be very acclimated to the environment, and it's like their own big small town in a way. And they might have a completely different persona than somebody who's a transplant there, which are a lot of people, myself included. um, and but there's something also endearing about that once you get used to the flow of things. And there seems to be a lot true about that uh, tough love New York thing that you experience over time. So there's definitely that quality about it as well. Um, yeah, and then you ended up mentioning that there were some things that you did initially getting there, that you moved into working for some architecture firms and pursuing that part of your degree. And I think also uh, having lived through that time, it was interesting being that kind of was the time where you're building up to the recession going on and this other stuff. What was that like?
Well, it's funny. I feel like I'm living one of those teeny bopper movies where the small town girl goes to the big city. But I had several jobs where okay. um, yeah, but I even remember one of my first internships as an architect. I had high heels on and I was walking on these hardwood floors, and the owner of the company turned around and was like, shh. Like, I don't know, everybody was just so mean, and I just realized the corporate world wasn't everything that I had dreamt. Like, it just was. I felt like I was always going to get in trouble all the time. And I had some pretty cool jobs. So I worked doing architecture and design for Goldman Sachs managing directors offices all over America. I'd get flown first class to design some of these offices. I worked for Christian Dior as a store planning and designer, store planning designer. So I got flown to Paris and all over America designing stores for Christian Dior. So I had some neat jobs, but the crazy thing is, I remember getting to work every day at 9:15, and I'm never late to anything. I'd have my bags ready at 5:59 to walk out the door. There was just something about those 15 years working in a corporate job. I don't know. I don't know what it was. I hated almost every minute of it.
Love it. Yeah, and I feel like there's so many people that can echo that professional experience. And it's interesting how that office environment is so widespread in New York, and it's changed so much since the pandemic has started as well. I mean, the real estate industry is in a very interesting place um, now, and you have everybody working remotely as well. So it's a little bit of a different crisis, and I feel like New York has been through a lot of crises. Um, Hurricane Sandy, I was there for that. The recession, where we find ourselves now. So um, as you work through that, and the recession was going on, and um, the you had this idea in the back of your head. You were maybe playing with those things when you went home at night. um, what was that experience like for you?
Well, I guess it's almost 13, 14 years ago that I had this light bulb idea that I just couldn't stop thinking about. And over the years, I've had tons of ideas that I got really excited about, but none of them would leave me alone the way that this idea was just almost haunting me. Like, I was in love with this idea. So for 2 straight years, I just kept walking around in circles telling everybody about my idea, which was ultimately to remove the business from a business card. And I had no idea what I was doing building a business, didn't know the first thing about it. But working my full time job, I met a couple of guys at a Mardi Gras party one day that I told about this idea. And they were like, well, we help small businesses get started up, and we'd like to sit down with you because we like your idea. So while I had my full time job, I was working at a really high end furniture and design company. And we sat down on that Monday morning and they became my new business partners. So I was ready to bring this business to life. So that's sort of what happened in the merge between corporate and me beginning to spin the wheels on entrepreneurship.
Right. Yeah, and it seems like those worlds are blurred for a lot of people who are starting up businesses, and it's especially courageous during a time when the economy might not be so hot, and that's in doubt. But I go by the phrase, "There's opportunity in crisis," and that seemed to present itself time over time as well. Um, and we talked a little bit also about where the New York scene per se found itself at that point. There was a lot of things then that were non-existent. And I remember the whole Silicon Alley thing and how that grew up. When Digital Dumbo first got started, you had eventually Startup Week, and all these other programs, and maybe you didn't even hear the word startup as much until you had that Eric Ries book come out, The Lean Startup. Um, People still had the idea of small businesses, but like at that time, it seemed to be before a lot of that happened. So, as somebody who was just diving into it, what was that like?
So I had launched this business. It took me 2 years to get it off the ground, and I was sort of moonlighting at my full-time career while trying to get this off the ground. But I remember somewhere along the line, I realized I needed to go start pitching my business. And I don't know if I signed up for some newsletter along the line, but then I realized there were all these opportunities for me to go speak about what I was doing. And I remember when I launched my business, I may have had 138 friends on Facebook. So that seemed like the freest and easiest way to get the word out. Otherwise, you needed to pay for advertising. What was that going to do? Like 138 people? I mean, apps weren't even a thing when I launched this business. It was just solely a website. But as nervous as I was to get on stage, I started going to every single pitch competition possible. I was in like the New Jersey startup scene. I mean, I would travel to go to these things. Like I would look for them. Not only was it reducing my stage fright, I was advertising myself and I was getting plugged into a networking scene that has been fruitful to this day. And it really turned my life inside out. But I do think I was one of the first female pioneers in the startup scene. I remember going to all these startup events and I was one of a few girls there. So the nice thing is we always stood out. Everybody knew who we were. And I always won all the pitch competitions.
Love it. Yeah, and I feel like we probably have a lot of shared connections in those groups, and I know we have a lot of shared friends as well. Known each other for a little bit now. Um, so yeah, and so you started this momentum building up on these pitch competitions, pitching your ideas, and then eventually you got a lot bigger attention around that, and building up to Shark Tank and some other things, some magazine features, whatnot. What was that road like, especially as all that stuff started to explode and there's so much interest around it?
Well, I think this is actually where my story gets really interesting. If anyone's asleep right now, this is when you should wake up. But as a creative person in general, I remember when I launched this business thinking, how am I going to tell the world about this idea? So I didn't really explain what my business was doing, but it was these cheats cards. So it was a deck of cards that you could slip to intriguing strangers. You could see someone on the subway and hand them a card, slip one to somebody at a bar, and they had these funny pickup lines on them and a code. So the recipient of that card would type in the code and find your profile on the website. So it was like reversing the process of online dating. It was a privacy protected way to pretty much hand a note to a total stranger that said, I want to see you again, without handing your phone number, your email address, your office address. So that's how I was taking the business out of the business card. So those little cards, I decided as a creative person that I was going to put one of those cards in a padded black envelope and send them out to 20 of the hottest editors in New York City with a "You've Been Cheeks" sticker on the back and nothing else. There was no note inside, just one of those cards. I think just like several weeks later, we were on the cover of the style section of the New York Times and it said, "MoveOverMatch.com. This is the next generation of online dating." That article crashed our website. I remember waking up the next morning because that article hit online at 10 p.m. Our website was down. I was freaking out. I thought our website had just been removed out of the world. I didn't even know what that meant, but we needed to call up and get more bandwidth. A few days later, we had a call from Oprah Winfrey Studio wanting an interview with me and a deck of those cards. I had people flying after reading this article from all over the world to interview me. People from Germany, the Associated Press. That article syndicated everywhere in the world. I mean, I thought I was going to be a gazillionaire within the next 3 months, but that's not how it worked really. So yeah, we had a big day that day, but hiring developers one after another, I just felt like I kept getting bamboozled. I couldn't get my website fixed ever. It was like I kept having these surgeons that weren't really qualified to dig in the snakes of behind the scenes in my websites. I ran out of money. And one day, a friend of mine sent me a link and said, "You've got the cutest idea, and it would be perfect for the Shark Tank. And they're accepting applications for season 5." So I was like, abc.com, I don't know, wherever that was, filled out this quick application, shut my computer, forgot about it. Then 3 months later, I remember getting this 310 area code phone call. I was out at happy hour at Vaughn in Nolita, and it was like, "ABC Shark Tank calling. You've got a cute idea, and we'd like to have a talk with you about taking you to the next level." I remember screaming, like the whole town probably heard me. And I guess a year after that, I found myself flying to LA to walk down that scary shark infested hallway.
There it
So
is.
that was, yeah, there it is. Sometimes you just got to fill out the application.
Absolutely. And so you so you landed at Shark Tank, and obviously, um, that has to be extremely exciting and intimidating experience at the same time. Um, what did you do to prepare for that? And like when you actually built up to going on stage, did you have an outline? What did you prepare for the actual pitch?
Well, so from the moment that I realized I was really going to get flown to LA, I I just went on shutdown. I got so terrified, and I'm telling you, I had pitched this business all over the world. I won every pitch competition possible. But I remember going up on the rooftop of my building. I'd get dressed in my outfit, and I would make the computer be my audience. So I would record myself doing this 2-minute pitch. I think almost to a fault. I did it too much. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I would start doing this thing. I was engaged to a guy back then. I think Shark Tank was the demise of our relationship.
Uh,
But he would even sometimes wake up and be like, "Hi, I'm Lori Cheek. I'm the founder and CEO." Like, he would do my pitch. I had done it so many times.
right.
So yeah, they fly you out there. You don't actually know when you're going to go on. So for 5 days, I think I waited for my time. And the funny thing is, they put you in a hotel with other people that are filming for the same season, and they tell you can't tell anybody what you're there for. But we all knew. We all knew. We were all in the hotel
Right.
bar every day, just like, I don't know. Somehow we came up with some sort of code to explain that, yes, I'm here for the thing. But we all became friends, but didn't talk about what we weren't supposed to talk about. But I remember getting taken in the golf cart, getting ready to go on stage that day, and I was walking down that hallway, and my throat was beating. Like, my heartbeat was in my throat. I'm not sure if anyone's ever felt this before, but I was terrified. And I'd had a couple of glasses of wine in my trailer. I actually had one of those like Hollywood trailers. Didn't take any edge off whatsoever. I didn't want to keep doing shots or anything. I just thought I'd spaz out or vomit on stage. But anyway, I got through the hallway, and looking at the sharks, you have this sort of old country western stare off for about, I guess it's a minute, which felt like an hour, which just takes you even more to another freaked out level. So something broke the ice, and they're like, "Okay, go." So that pitch that I had practiced over and over and over again that I could do in my sleep, I was worried that the words weren't going to come out of my mouth, but they did, and they came out on autopilot. And I remember after my episode aired, the Twitter feed was basically like, "The cheeked robot needs to breathe or blink." And they were right, because when I watched myself, I was like, "Hi, I'm Lori Cheek," like a robot, and I did not breathe. But still, I'm glad I got the words out. I don't care how they got out there, but yeah, it still, whatever my story was, it didn't bode too well on the show.
and yeah, when obviously I think every person that's ever done some sort of just basic audience presentation beyond pitching encounters that kind of stage anxiety, and that's very relatable that way. So once you got up there, how did it go?
So I had my eye on Mark Cuban for lots of different reasons. And I think that initially he's the one that got the idea the most. So I was like, okay, here's our love story, me and Mark. And of course, I said the stupidest thing because I remember saying that I believed in this idea so much that I thought I could change the population, which means I was going to make so many matches that it was going to change the number of people in the world. And he said, okay, you're delusional, I'm out. And I was just like, oh. And then I swear, all the sharks have headphones in their ears. I mean, it's national television, so we don't know what's going on in these headphones. But I have this theory that I think the producers may even say, like, okay, take her down. You know, they're crafting a story, or maybe they just all thought I was a loser. But I just felt like there was something where they were all like following in his footsteps, and they all pretty much told me to stop what I was doing and go back and get my job in architecture. Kevin O'Leary started telling me one of those rabid dog stories about taking my business behind a barn and shooting it. And even I
And he's the
remember when
rabid dog, isn't he?
yes, but when he started doing this and started story time, I remember putting my brain somewhere else. Like I had to go into some meditation mode because I didn't want to know what he was saying. I wouldn't have been able to keep going. So I just like zoned out. And there was one point I was like, okay, I'm on national television. There's all these cameras everywhere. I got to tune back in. I think he's about done. And then the rest of them went out. But Barbara Corcoran did tell me that I was the right entrepreneur with the wrong idea. And I took that advice. Yeah, there I was. There's the robot. Um, and that looks like a happy smile, but I think that was I'm scared out of my mind, nervous smile. And even the people on the Twitter stream were like, her idea was so stupid. I think the bleach from her hair must have gotten into her brain. Okay, but that was just a few people. The
Right.
day after my episode aired, which took 4 months, I couldn't tell anybody about it. So 4 months later, the show finally airs. And yeah, I didn't even know how they were going to cut the thing up. So I didn't know, even if
Right.
I knew I didn't get a deal, what they were going to make me look like. So they pretty much didn't put any of the genius stuff I said in it. So they cut all the smart things out. But still, that show, no matter how well or how terribly you do, I think it's an amazing opportunity, and it turned my life inside out all over again.
That's a great story too. And just in terms of dealing with rejection, obviously everybody's got to face that at some points in their life. Um, I mean, that's got to be immense when you're on national television and you just kind of keep going and you just put your nose to the grindstone that way. And, that perseverance is really admirable. So, like, once all that went down, you said you learned a lot of lessons from the show and, you continued to go on with it after that. What drove you forward? What drove you to continue on?
I've never done anything halfway in life. And I think there's something about a challenge that just riles me up even more. Because I remember at the very end of this show, when they'd all said, no thanks, go back and get your job, I was like, I can't just turn around and walk off. So
Right.
I said, I looked them each like this and I was like, trust, you will all see me again. And I turned around and walked off then. So of course they didn't show that on the show, but them all saying no to me, I still believed in this idea. Like, you can't imagine. And I even said on the Q&A afterwards, I'm glad they actually didn't air this, but I was like, there are 5 old people that are married and they're billionaires for the most part. Like, they don't understand what it is to be a single person roaming around in a city of 8.5 million people that don't talk to each other, that are always looking down at their phones.
Right.
They didn't get it. So there was that. And the day after my show aired, after sifting through all the emails and everything, yes, 10% were talking about the bleach in my hair, But I must have had 2,000 emails of people saying, whatever you do, don't give up on this idea. You're ahead of your time. The sharks were out of their mind for not investing in your business. And that gave me a whole new level of fuel. So I just wanted to somehow find a way to keep this going, remove the cloud from that show. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we talked a little bit about the early days of the both the tech and the startup scene in New York. And I mean, I remember what that was like before the dawn of cool tech. It was very pocket protector. It was kind of like almost like the show Silicon Valley. And I mean, I even remember my grandpa going to like Hewlett Packard uh, showrooms and stuff, and uh, bringing back little knickknacks. And I guess it's not too dissimilar in the Javits Center uh, when they hold tech events down there, and that paradigm still hasn't changed. But in terms of where where the world was at that point in time, you mentioned there was like Match.com out there. There was Plenty of Fish. There was sites like that. Tinder or Bumble hadn't even come on the scene yet. So this idea is very original. So as you grew the business idea, um, did you have to factor in, competitive positioning and, where that staked out, or was it more just kind of like, let's put the pedal to the metal and get speed to market?
Well, the pedal to the metal was sort of difficult because there was never the money. Like, if
Yeah.
I had ever had the right amount of money, I think I could have spun this business even on the old concept, Shark Tank or no Shark Tank. If I had the money, I probably wouldn't have even gone on Shark Tank. But I think I am glad that I failed, sort of, because it led me to the Shark Tank, that led me to so many other things. Um, but yeah, the competition, I think we had a niche that was unlike what anyone else was doing. And that's why I thought we had such a runway to get where I really had hoped that we would. But I keep hitting some severely strong brick walls over the past 10 years.
Yeah. And I think you've had possibly mentors as well during that process, and people that you've interacted with. Um, so what does that experience look like for you? And um, what kind of advice have you gotten during that period of growing the business?
The closest thing to a legit mentor I had was this trio of people in Chicago that met me at a tech conference. I think I was down there at some startup event, and they got really serious about coming on board as my investors. And they were so micromanaging my every move. Like, if I put anything on Facebook, I'd get a phone call the next day. Okay, we need to talk about why you just did that. I mean, it was everything. Um, from what I'd wear. But I remember the advice this man gave me was I needed to start saying no to almost everything.
Mm.
And that is the opposite of who I am. And I'm so glad that I did not take that advice from the man that was ready to invest in me and become the closest thing to a formal mentor of mine. Because I think saying yes to every opportunity in my life has got me where I am. Um, and that's my own definition of success. But I'd say my business partner, who is a serial and savvy tech entrepreneur, who came on board about the time that I went onto the Shark Tank, he's probably been the biggest gift to me out of everyone, and he's on my team. So it's nice to have sort of an in-house mentor.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned Techstars and some other things like that as well. Do you feel like the community kind of formed up around um, small businesses and startups in general in New York? As you were growing this idea?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. When I first started, there was little to nothing. And we were a finalist in the Techstars program, I guess almost 10 years ago, which was sort of exciting. We never oh, they actually offered us a position in Techstars if we wanted to relocate to Washington, which, I didn't move to New York to go to Washington. So I said no. I'm not sure if that was a mistake or not, but um, yeah, I think the startup scene in New York just like blew up, and I think it became bigger than actually what was going on in California. So I think it was a really exciting time before the pandemic.
Yeah. Um, and I definitely feel that. And, things have changed a lot within that time. And um, so we're now, finding ourselves in the midst of a pandemic, and obviously everybody around the world has to deal with that right now. And there's no real special cases as far as that's concerned, but everybody's dealing with it in their own way, and especially as it pertains to business. So, being that this challenge has been presented to you now, maybe where do you find yourself at with the business these days, and where do you picture that going? I guess in your own words, over the next year or two.
Well, I didn't mention after the Shark Tank that we actually pivoted our idea outside of these cards. So there's no longer these physical cards anymore. We turned it into a Bluetooth dating app, which means that you make connections in real time and space. So you'd walk into a crowded bar or a nightclub or a gym or a cafe or even on a street corner where there's lots of people, and you could make an immediate connection and have a chance to spark up a conversation face to face, or simply send someone a note or do it later on the app. So that's just not really ideal in a time of social distancing, which we really don't know when this is going to end. So our app has sort of gone down the dark side right now because there's no crowded anything. But I've also currently relocated to Kentucky, so I'm full circle back where I grew up. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm new in town, and I'm here in a time where you can't really meet people or go networking or go to pitch competitions or anything. So I've come up with an idea again that I sort of can't stop thinking about. And knowing me, when I get like this, hopefully I'll be able to bring this to life, and I'll use every mistake I've made in the past to successfully do this one out of the gate in the right way.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And um, it is interesting, the concept as you described it too. So overall, just kind of summarize this a little bit. What advice would you give to young aspirational, yeah, entrepreneurs, especially during this time?
I mean, I think right now is an amazing time to come up with something new, because what's everybody doing otherwise? I think it's a great time to even start networking virtually, which I've even made great efforts to do. Uh, Reach out to people like me, reach out to people who aren't going to offices anymore, ask people questions. But I think if you, like I've said a couple of times, if you come up with an idea that you can't stop thinking about, find an amazing support team, put smart people around you, and do everything in your power to bring it to life. And I do think it's interesting that even in the beginning of my own business, I remember having the idea and then coming up with the name, buying the URL. How easy is that? That's when it was like giving birth. Then it makes it easy to go to the next step. So getting a logo, then you really start see this thing coming to life. The second it's online and you've got a brand or a name, even a tagline, I think everything is sort of uphill from, well, yeah, it's uphill and downhill. But it's just a really great start. So in people's spare time right now, I think it's an exciting opportunity.
Makes sense. Yeah. And I definitely think that there's, as I mentioned before, similarities with the recession. And we saw what happened with a lot of the activities that were going on then, and how booming the economy became afterwards. Um, that's kind of classic contrarian thinking that way, and it seems very wise. So I have a question here from Doug. Are you thinking of shelving the Cheeked app to focus on your new idea potentially?
Well, I do hope that things come back to life eventually, and I don't necessarily think I need to scrap Cheeked. I think it's just going to be stewing in the App Store with people giving it bad reviews for a while, but I just don't want to pull the plug on it after everything I've been through. And I really love the technology of this, and this could be spun into so many other things. I mean, I didn't mention that we've actually built another networking app that works in a similar light. So imagine you go to like a South by Southwest or a crowded conference, and you can sort of find out who's there. All these other conference apps don't really work. No one's like, there's like 3 people on every conference app I've ever gone to, so you don't really meet them. So yeah, I'm not going to pull the plug on it until I really have to, but it's really not working.
Yeah,
Anyway.
understandable. And I think that's the most interesting part of this conversation too. And I think that part is very valuable. And it's interesting as well. We talked about that a little bit, and the networking concept. So obviously, most people that are working in any sort of professional environment right now have this thing of, if you're an event planner, if you are anybody that works in uh, these kind of brick and mortar, um, heavily rooted in in-person experiences type of roles, that all of that's gone virtual more or less, and even more so now that we're going into more lockdowns and things like that. Um, as it stands, there's not really an organic way to network, and that's still a solution that could be worked on. And I know that the biggest thing about that is, even for some conferences I've seen recently, you might had as you know uh, bogged down as they are, those happy hours after the conference and whatnot, and uh, there's a lot going on, but you tend to meet at least 2 or 3 people that you find valuable, and you might make some meaningful connections there, and it might you know come through some awkward handshakes and bowing out of conversations and whatnot, and that messy part of networking is what makes it beautiful. But there is something to that random seed, and being able to connect to people who otherwise wouldn't be talking. So that part of your idea there is very, very interesting, and I think there's a need for that in the marketplace right now too. So really excited to see where you go with it as well,
Yeah, I do want to
personally.
just sort of bring back exactly what you were talking about, that just walking into a bar or walking into a networking event. And, Bumble has made Bumble Business, Bumble BFF, and then Bumble for Dating, I think. And I don't really know anyone using that. But my idea is sort of to have this organic way of like walking into like a knitting meetup, and then you're talking to some other lady about knitting. But the opportunity is this could be anyone anywhere in the world, but you get into a video chat with these people, so it would
Right.
feel like you're walking into the bar or the knitting meetup or the Techstars meetup, any of it. So that's what I want to do.
Love it. Yeah, and so my mentee from 212 NYC, Jesse, has a question as well. Jesse, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had well, first off, thank you for sharing the story. That was a lot, and I'm just really glad we are able to hear all of that. So I just wanted to ask you, I think one of the things you mentioned was obviously this idea was kind of bubbling around in your mind for a while, I think about 2 years. What was the moment where you decided like this is something I want to put a considerable amount of investment in time and energy to try to bring this to fruition?
I wanted to, out of the gate, like the night I came up with the idea, I was out to dinner with an architectural colleague, and he'd written on the back of his business card, "Want to have dinner?" He slid it to a woman as we were leaving the restaurant, and they ended up going on a date. And I left with this idea about slipping dating cards to people. So that weekend I met with like 20 people at the Soho House in New York, and we started coming up with all these pickup lines, sort of just coming up with the idea of how these cards would work. Like, how do people find you? Do you put your phone number on there, your email? I mean, from that moment forward, I started trying to come up with logos and what's this going to be called. So, I mean, all that was just me working my full-time job. Just, it felt very side hustle-y. And then I think it was the moment that I finally had these two guys that were like, we're going to help you really get this thing off the ground. I mean, I just was telling everybody about it. And then some people were like, stop telling people your idea. Luckily, nobody built it, but I think that was it. Having the people that actually had the smarts and how to get a patent, how to get the trademarks, just applying for the LLC or whatever we were going to do. I didn't know anything about any of that. And back then, I don't even think there were that many resources, but now there are.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that too, Lori. There's this there's all these MBA concepts, and Jesse will appreciate this because he's in an MBA program right now at UCLA, and it seems like you learn a lot of those concepts as you're creating a business. So that's something interesting to touch on as well. In terms of actually, making a functioning business and like getting it off the ground and pursuing entrepreneurship. Uh, do you feel like formal education is necessary to do that? It doesn't have to be a why or why not. It can be a very organic answer. But, like, how have you learned maybe outside of your formal education?
I've learned by making every mistake possible. And I mean, perhaps if I had had a formal education, I wouldn't have gone through all of these terrible things that I went through. I mean, there was a period I ran out of money and I was almost like short of homeless. I wasn't going to call my parents and ask them to pay my rent. I was just going to figure it out. So I don't know, but I think a lot of those mistakes just made me the poster child of what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. And it has. Like, I feel like I'm made of steel now. And I don't know if that's a good thing, but when I start a new business, I've given myself a crash course in business, and it was by making all these mistakes. But as far as an education, yeah, I think there's so many resources now. There's so many online courses. There's so many mentorship programs, co-working spaces, networking events that my parents would kill me for saying these words that maybe an education is not necessary, but sometimes it's not. Sorry, Mom and Dad. I know they're not listening.
Awesome. Cool. Well, if anybody else has any questions, let us know right now. I'm just going to pause. Oh, we got one here. It's from Brandon. How do you find and convince other great teammates to help grow your business? How do you seek them out?
Well, I just have a pretty unconventional entrepreneurial story in general, so I don't think mine is necessarily typical, but I will say that I think networking like a champ is the best way to find the people you need to surround you, because everybody's there for the same reason. But the guy who is ultimately what I call my angel, my investor, my tech partner, my mentor, I hired him off of Craigslist about 9 years ago to help me work on my website. Like, one of the many times it was broken, I went to Craigslist to find this guy. He ended up, usually where you find murderers. This is where I found the person that saved my life, pretty much. So he bought out my old business partners and is still involved with me and my business to this day. But yeah, I think that's a pretty unconventional way to find such the magic missing piece that I needed the whole time I was building this business. But in a traditional manner, I would say that networking is the king.
Awesome. Here's one more question from Andrea. I really admire your tenacity, Lori, and I do too, by the way. Did you ever doubt yourself? And if so, what did you do to stay motivated?
I don't think I've talked enough about who I am, but no, I never doubted myself, even from the beginning, not knowing anything. I knew who I was investing in, and that was me. So I knew how hard I'd be working on this. I knew what I believed in. And I know to this day, it's almost a joke, but you guys could see me in 30 years. I've said I will not kill this business, and I could be 80 years old on a cane in a senior citizen's home with some like silver sneakers dating business called Cheeks. Like for some reason, this has become my legacy, and it's my name. My coffee cup here has my name on it. Like it's just like this is bigger than me now. I don't even know if I'm answering the question right now, but the answer is no. I never doubted myself.
Love it. That says a lot about self-empowerment too, and I think that's a great overall concept that everybody has to run with in their professional life. There's a question from Marie here as well, and I think you answered it a little bit with the current solution that you're creating, even. But what do you feel are the best ways to network in this current climate, given the limitations?
I have recently written about this. So I'm in a new place and I'm craving physical connection, any sort of connection. I have one entrepreneur friend that knows what I'm looking for. So I'm looking for a developer, new partner, any sort of business connection. So there are all these Slack groups here, even in Louisville, Kentucky, that you can join and sort of put feelers out about who's interested in joining me on this mission. There are some business ladies here in town that have I forgot what the group is called, but we're doing these outdoor, there's like 6 to 8 of us outside, distance, wine, and just everybody gets 20 minutes to talk about what's going on in their business, and we all try to chime in and support one another. And then if somebody has a problem, they know people. So I just think just because we're in the middle of this does not mean that you can't somehow safely network. And I think that people are craving connection more than ever. So this is really a good time to do it.
Love it. And another question out of that, if you could go back in time, what other businesses would you have liked to create?
I still talk about this one. Okay, I'm single. I know I own a dating business. I'm single. But as a single woman, one of the biggest struggles is when you're leaving the house, like pulling up the zipper on your little black dress before you go out to your cocktail party. Sometimes you just can't get that zipper up. And I have left the house, I mean, to tons of times until I have somebody who zip the zipper up. So I have this single girl zipper idea. It's called the single girl zipper. It's like a quick release zipper that you can either quick release, or the thing actually is made of leather or pearls. It may have a feather on the end, and you could either let it hang behind you, sort of like a tail off of your zipper, or you could even pull it around and it could become a necklace. So this could actually be my quick release, and then it turns into a piece of jewelry. So I was at my networking ladies event back in July. They got so excited about this. My friend who buys URLs like they're going out of business, she bought the singlegirlzipper.com or something like that. The next morning, one of the other women had done their research. Someone's built it. And she's patented the idea. I mean, not with all the details that I had, but she had something that's like a zipper release thing. So that was one. And I had training wheel tattoos. So it was a way to like test drive tattoos all over your body that you're actually thinking about getting. You don't know where you want it, what you want it. So it was training wheel tattoos. I had even made a logo for that one years ago, like 13 years ago. I mean, there's so many other things. Like my last name is Cheek, and I used to want to come up with this sort of a society what to do in New York list. So it was going to be called the Cheek Sheet. So I would send out tips and like party crashing ideas. But yeah, I don't know. That wasn't going to be the money maker. Those were my top 3 over the years, but I've had so many other little silly ideas.
That was great. And you do got to get real creative at some point with business ideas as you move on. Cool. So this is probably a good place to close it out here. And just wanted to ask you as well, Lori, in terms of getting in touch with you, do you want to throw out any kind of contact information? Are you on LinkedIn? What are the best ways to reach you?
Yeah, I'm on everything except TikTok, pretty much. And
You're building
you
up to it,
can
right?
find me. Yeah, I'll be there. And I'm Lori at cheeked.com if anyone wants to email me.